The boom bust player and inconsistency in Dynasty fantasy football. We're going to look at consistency and floor, variance, ceiling, that and more this week on the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Jordan, Amari Cooper, one of those glaring names, Will Fuller, some of our favorites have been dubbed as inconsistent over the years. And yet it really takes breaking it down step by step to talk about variance, talk about ceiling and floor, and talk about fantasy points. And when you get them, isn't always the most important thing.
Yeah, consistency is just a myth, and it's the most exploitable narrative going in terms of player analysis. And so, I mean, that's really the end all be all of the analysis for me. I mean, we'll go more specifically, but I think that's the big takeaway is when you look at these things, people get into this impression that games are really close and that, oh, I don't want to lose by a couple of points. Oh, it's really important that I get a high floor for all of my guys and whatnot. When in reality, it's a solution in search of a problem. Most games aren't close, and the thing that most determines the outcome of your dynasty team, your fantasy team throughout the entire season, is the total number of points that you score. Right? That explains a huge percentage of your record. That's natural, right? That's exactly what you would think, right? Score a lot more points, going to win a lot more games. All of the other factors, outside of if you just try to strip luck away from it, every other factor outside of points in luck basically explains 5% of your record. Essentially, is the easiest way to think of it. So it's a really small margin, right? And so when you sort of are worrying about those narratives and you're worrying about anything other than points, it's a conversation that you're just kind of spinning your wheels in. And it's I think the key thing with player points is and consistency is the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's what one of my professors told me. And it's people want to talk about everything other than the most important thing, which is scoring a lot of points. And anytime you're doing something other than that, you're doing it wrong. And that's a huge narrative that you can exploit.
Knowing this was going to be the topic du jour this week, I went poking around the internet. That's dangerous.
Oh boy,
that's dangerous. Just looking for things about consistency rankings, and what I noticed is these rankings, a lot of times the players that were highest in terms of inconsistency, it's because their ceiling was so high. It's because they had massive big weeks. Yes. Yeah, guess what? You know what's the most consistent? The guy that never plays. He scores 0 all the time. He scores less than 10 all the time. Book it. I'm going to put him in as my running back 2 or wide receiver 4, and he's going to score 6 or less. Great job. I got the consistent player. So this whole, I scored 4 one week, 40 the next. Focus on the positive. Like you were talking about keeping it simple. I mean, your whole lineup is like a painting, or it's basically like a basketball team. We talk basketball all the time. And, if you have a guy that puts up 40 or 50, your team's going to win a good amount. Why? Because it's points. They basically produce like 2 players. And so if you have a wide receiver, Amari Cooper comes out, he puts up 35. That allows the rest of your team, someone to have a dud, maybe even 2 players to have a dud. So it's total points. And I think a lot of people get fixated on, I lost by 9 points, and it's the guy who scored 4 or dropped the touchdown pass, and it's their fault. There's so many times, if you watch all the games and really break down DPIs versus receptions versus 1 foot got reviewed for a touchdown and it wasn't, all these little micro moments of NFL plays that turn into production on our box score, and they just get lost. You look later on, oh, this guy scored 9. He must have stunk. He almost had 30. It's really small margins. And like the thing I want you to hit one more time is most matchups aren't close. Start looking at your results. I mean, even leagues that it's like, oh, we only start 7 guys, and the average result is like 100 points or something for your team. So many are blowouts. And by blowouts, I mean, it didn't come down to 1 touchdown. It didn't come down to 2 or 3 runs by a running back. That a lot of times, most of your games are just not going to be overly close. So you can't dwell on that. You're going to win some close, lose some close, and oblong ball and head-to-head matchups is just built to have all this in there, all this fuzziness around the edges.
Yeah, so I took this is from old analytics at Dynasty research. So I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs. I think sum it up. The average weekly scoring across the sample of teams that I looked at, which is just public leagues and 141.78 points, with the median was about the same. This average team had a standard deviation of 28.94 points. This means you can expect 95% of the average team's weekly scores to be between 83.9 and 199.7. This is a range of, and I rounded it, it's over 115 points, in which you can expect basically 95% of the games to be played. So just think about how wide that margin is. The other thing here that I would point to is that the margin of victory. So we could actually go and look at what the actual margin of victory in these games was. 17.85% of games were decided by less than 10 points, while more than a quarter, 26.87, were decided by 50 points or more. So that it's more likely.
It's not even close. Yeah. Someone having a dud game, an injury or two, half their team doesn't score a touchdown. These are killers, or you face the hot team, everyone was on fire. And so, yeah. And what you said, the one thing, so inside of 10 points, that's really where people get peeved, right? That's the results that are, I almost had it. Like, I really wanted to win. I really needed this game, or I got lucky. I didn't score that well, but I barely won. That all that woulda won, coulda lost type stuff. 17%, 1 out of 6 or so is basically competitive within 10 points. If you're watching the games, or you got one more guy going, you're interested. You're glued to the, you're almost like a Vegas gambler. You're dialed into a few plays here in the second half of this game with one guy left to go. It matters. Things could occur here and shift the result. Otherwise, not so much. So just really keeping that prism of 85% of games, they're kind of over, and they're not one player away or one play away. And I think that's a key takeaway that's why we focus in Dynasty on building teams, building depth so that you have quality plans. Once you set the lineup, you're just kind of out there. You go out into the ether, and the results will be what the results are. And I track things, which is like an efficiency or sort of a scheduling quirk metric of what's my all-play record compared to what's my head-to-head record across my leagues. And most of the time, you get to the end of the year, and it's relatively close. Over 35, 40 leagues, I'll be within a couple wins of what all play is versus the record. Now, individual leagues can be a little off. You might have gotten really screwed in a good way, in a bad way, in certain leagues because just of the scheduling, snafu and just the trail you lead. But that's an aggregate portfolio sort of view, and you kind of need to start doing that. When you get into more than one or two leagues, it's about the aggregate result. You can't get fixated on one league, 1 week, one player.
Yeah, totally. A couple other things too I'd point to is that people think that consistency really matters on a team level. There's zero proof of that. There's zero proof of the fact that teams with what I would consider narrower ranges of points perform better. They don't. And so a lot of the, I've looked at this a bunch of different ways. And so, it would be, how do you sort of, what you talked about, right? Do teams that are really consistent outperform their outplay record? Because that would be something that you could think of like, hey, maybe that's something there. No, it's totally random, which I would submit makes a lot of sense. And so that's one of the big things. The other thing too, that I think that people get, Amari Cooper's one, Mike Evans is another one. So much of the wide receiver position is your big weeks are defined by your top 24 weeks really tend to match up with when you score touchdowns. And if you're scoring 8 of them, right, that's kind of going to be in the fault line, which in 8's really good, right? That's a really good season. And you look at these guys where, if you finish, I did some research. Basically, if you finish with, if I told you that you're going to get 8 games of top 24 weekly production at the wide receiver position, you're an absolute lock to finish in the top 30 of the position. And it's like a 95 plus percent outcome that you finish in the top 24. So again, and that's 8 games. That's half of the games. Well, in a 16-week season, it's half of the games. And that's not even accounting for anything else like missed games or anything like that. It's just, did you achieve that? It's a huge, huge hit rate. And again, people sort of think that, I did some polling on it. 50% of people said that's a boom bust wide receiver. right? So, which is just incredible when you sort of look at it. The other thing too that I would say is when you look at player production, especially for receiver, this is a big topic for wide receivers. It tends to be where you see it pop up. Only 9% of your variance in a year, so your week to week deviation in terms of points, is explained by last year. So to say when when you're looking at a player like, hey, this person is boom bust, like you should dock them, but there's very little evidence that that's a good idea, right? There's
You should stick with that for the next year,
right? It's not sticky year to year, right? And so all the things we talk about, targets and receptions and points, right? All the things that are much more sticky, right? Sort of work towards those things. And again, this is just another example of you keep the main thing. You can sort of go down these rabbit holes of searching, of just, supermarket sweep type approach of all these excuses why not to take good players. And
touchdowns should be the last thing that you try to predict.
Correct.
Touchdowns are especially weekly, but even the season, the regression, that's why you do it. You bet on the guys that were low last year, fade a little bit the guys that were high in general. I mean, that's where we go with this. And what's funny is, listen to this laundry list of guys that I looked on one consistency ranking for fantasy football. The top 25 most consistent wide receivers. Let's see. Amari Cooper was number 10, most consistent. Will Fuller was number 5. Mike Evans was 13. So guys that remember last year with Mike Evans, oh man, just he had that one game of like 2 catches for 2 touchdowns and 2 yards or something. And then, he has other games that he blows up for 30 plus, 40 plus. My point is we pretty much named 3 high upside guys, right? And again, I think if you hear inconsistent or boom bust, you need to focus on the boom part. How would we stay a little more positive? Because that means they have it in them. I mean, some of these wide receivers, I mean, they might top out where 15, 20 points is kind of the max. Right. You kind of don't know that going in per se. I mean, if you have a guy that sees a decently high targets and quality snaps on a good offense, the ceiling is there. The perfect storm in any particular week is there. Now, does it happen in a particular season or a month? Who knows? But I think focusing on variance is a good thing because it's widening the gap. The bottom for everybody is 0. Missing a game early in the, game early, getting shut out, getting watched for 1 yard, all these things are a range of outcomes for players. Unlikelier, for others, but focus on the ceiling part because you just mentioned it. I mean, the average fantasy score is ranging from, you mentioned 80 to like 190 for a lot of the outcomes. That's doubling up. That's basically like 2 weeks. You score really well, it's like double. You almost want to save your points, but that's not how it works. So it's the aggregate. What did the team do? If that's 2 guys going bonkers and they total 85, 90 points, and you have 3 guys that, like, 1 guy gets hurt, 2 guys barely produced anything, but you still won, you still posted, you still scored a requisite amount of points, just chalk it up, move on. Don't hate the players that didn't score that week. What'd you want to score? 500? Like, be careful, right? Because regression touchdown-wise every single week is going to keep coming back.
Yeah. And the other thing too I'd say about this is something that you hit on. When you sort of look at these numbers, Mike Evans right around 15 points per game last year. If you sort of look at if you just look at week 16, for example, and week 16, pretty darn important week in terms of fantasy, he had 40 points. Okay. That actually it would hurt his consistency ranking. So just think about that for a second.
If his previous high was 32, he increases the high to 40. Correct. And you look at the whole season. Yeah, so
it makes him more inconsistent, which is just a ludicrous. If you're punishing for that, that's a ludicrous outcome, right? It's absolutely ludicrous.
My final point and kind of leading question here would be that you have players that if Mike Evans has 3 or 4 30-point plus games in him in a particular year, the reason you put him in your lineup every single week is not about, I think he's going to score 12 or higher every week. It's that I want to ensure I get all, what do they say? I want all of the big games. Like that, so that's what you want, right? That's why you start certain guys. You go, I think they can go 30 plus. You put them in there. We always talk about what the heck flex, Sig Bloom always talks about that. And part of that is, hey, you're shooting for it, right? You're shooting for the bullseye. The perfect storm could happen. That could be a starting running back filling in, Mike Davis or something like that. But it also could be a wide receiver that you go, they could get loose. A Will Fuller type could go for 2 long touchdowns. That type where you just Deshaun Jackson, right? Mr. Inconsistent. Some games he doesn't even post. He doesn't even really show up. Other games he can go for 35. And so you throw that in because there's a percentage chance you get that from your flex or your wide receiver 3.
You're going to win.
The odds are very good that you're going to win,
right,
unless the rest of your team, you face another guy that went off or whatever it is. But man, you put those guys in your lineup all the time to get the big weeks. It's not that, oh, Mike Evans, I really value the 12 you put up last week and the 16. I'm super looking forward to it. That doesn't move the needle. We just talked about it. Most games aren't that close. It doesn't matter. You can put, I'm going back to some of the early research I saw in fantasy football where if you don't even, and it was kind of talking about margin of victory. If you don't start a quarterback, you still win more than half the time. The team that won still wins more than half the time with a quarterback, the highest scoring position, posting 0. So, again, you want to encapsulate all the big weeks, and that's why you start your big time players is to get that collection of the whole season of however many they do.
Yeah, to your point, in the sample that I used, it's literally the break even point is 30 points. Right, that's your base. That's basically the median margin of error, the margin of victory in a game. So you just think about that. If, whatever 27 point and it's 6-point passing touchdown. So I need like 27-point quarterback, right? They're not even deciding. You could bench them and leave the spot open and you still won, right? So that's that. I definitely agree with you on that. I think that tends to be, and we think so much about weekly lineup decisions and all that stuff. It's when you sort of look at it through this lens, you might worry about it a little bit less. Yeah. One other thing too that I would say is I think it is important to consider two additional things. One, different positions you want more variance in. Okay, so with that, I just at the end of the year, if you tell me the wide receiver points, right, you're just going to sort of plug that in. I'm just going to start Mike Evans every week. I'm going to capture that. That's largely true at tight end as well, just because there's not huge, right? So much of it, again, is touchdown based, right? So it's really tough to know what week is going to be a touchdown week. At the running back position, it's very different. So you can take very bimodal players. And so what I mean by that is, the Latavius Murray types, right? When Alvin Kamara is out, we're going to get a Latavius Murray week. We can start him. We know the week to start him. And we're embracing that variance because we're able to sort of run towards it. We're putting him in lineups and we sort of know the week that he can do an uptick. Much more difficult to predict at wide receiver and at tight end. The other thing too that I would say is, well, consistency is a myth in season, and it becomes very overcooked as a strategy to achieve, right? It's something that I think we should reject. What is important is consistency year over year, especially at wide receiver. Right? So we know that targets tend to be very predictive. For example, that's really, really important information, right? Because you can sort of say, hey, listen, I'm going to shoot for, right? If you're going to aim for, wide receiver X had 130 targets last year. We kind of know that those things tend to perform relatively close. Right?
He was deemed important and valuable by his team and his offense.
Correct. And when you sort of get up there, it's really those things tend to stay true. Right. So if Devontae Adams is seeing 9 targets a game, like those things don't change a ton, because that's sort of how the offense is built. It doesn't really change unless it's an injury, largely speaking. So that's a really important thing. So the year over year consistency, especially at wide receiver, is really, really important. Where week to week consistency, which is where so much of the conversation takes place, is something that I think you can really ignore because no one has a really good way to do it.
This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 58 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And the theme is consistency and inconsistency, high variance this week. But if you want to consistently win at fantasy football, it's challenging. It takes time. You need the Football Guys premium subscription that gives you the edge helps you make more winning decision. And for everybody in Dynasty, this is the key: in less time. So it saves you time. You get the edge, all the content you need. I do want to shout out because one of the prompts of this was we had an article come out last week by new Football Guys staffer Ryan Weiss about, is it time to stop calling Amari Cooper inconsistent? The wide receiver one over the first month. So he fits a lot of the things we've been discussing in this show so far. But again, the early bird discount is now available. We're officially a month away from the paywall going up in full force. You do want to sign up for the daily email update, and that gets you a bunch of free content. In the near term, you want to kick the tires a little bit, but trust me, you won't be disappointed. You get the same league-winning information and guidance, but for the early bird discount. Just head over there. There's a big orange button in the right corner saying join now. So we'll do the work and you do the winning. Time for some dynasty trades. Pick some good profiling ones here for discussion. Superflex, we've got Justin Herbert for Trevor Lawrence and Elijah Moore.
Justin Herbert for Trevor Lawrence and Elijah Moore. I mean, this is just a classic one for me. Talk about knowing information about players, right? Quarterback's a big deal. And so I look at, have you hit? So we haven't with Trevor Lawrence. We have once with Herbert. It's better than not hitting as a career predictor. I'd much rather have 2 hits because those are pretty seismic differences in terms of production. Give me, and again, it's at the cost of, I sort of evaluate trades largely by core guys. And I think you're moving up a level and how strong you feel in your core asset here, which would be moving from Lawrence to Herbert, and you're giving up not a core guy to do so. So for me, that's a really easy way to look at it, and give me Herbert.
Yeah, I think we've discussed Herbert versus Lawrence versus some of these other guys before, where it's like just take the likely double or triple right now. And yes, we still need another hit, and he still has an incomplete profile if you want to be truly secure. But things are pointing upwards. He's already halfway home. And that's a lot better than Lawrence, who is 0 of the way there. And to be fair, rookie quarterbacks, even from 101, he's probably not going to be 1 hit away after this year, most likely.
Hey, can I run a question by you on Lawrence? What would you say the odds are that come this time next year is the top ADP or the top real draft position for rookie quarterbacks from this class? So what are the odds that you would say that he's above Lance, he's above Fields, he's above
everybody, right? Versus the field, right?
Wilson and Jones.
I would say in ADP, well, he's going to have some allegiances there, but I think in terms of like warranting it, like, is he the top per game, whatever cross section of the season we see of starters? I think the odds are low. And by low, I mean you take the field and it's under 50%. I would probably say maybe something in the 30% range, that in terms of ADP. And again, I don't think he technically has to be the top producing guy to still hold that position if it's close. He's going to get some tiebreakers there.
Yeah, no, totally. And it just harkens back to Herbert being so far below Burrow and being so far below Tua. I don't think we're particularly good at projecting future valuations, and your answer being much, much closer to what you would say is random amongst that group of guys. Yeah. I think
he's 30%, somebody else is 20, someone else is 26. Yeah. Right. I mean, the point is, like, he has an edge, but it's not like double anybody else's.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's a great way to think about it. I think that sort of skepticism is exactly what I would have expected. So that's good. Yeah.
Before this other dynasty trade, I did want to ask about some of the tea leaves we've heard coming out. There's 2 or 3 the past day or 2 that have actually been interesting. The quotes from Melvin Gordon about how it's a competition, and it sounds like a lot of the stuff out of Denver is Javonte Williams, even Mike Boone, who they were very specific in acquiring. The answer is not Royce Freeman. We kind of have clarity that's the direction this is going. But Melvin Gordon, is he not going to be that sneaky early season starter? Is this going to be pretty disappointing for him because he's involved in this next trade? But what are your thoughts on the Denver backfield and just how it's shaping up with Javonte Williams, early second round, Melvin Gordon, 28 years old? Is this going to be something that's more of a committee early, or do you think it's going to be Gordon startable, pretty high confidence early in the season?
So, yeah, I actually saw some speculation that he might get cut. But if you sort of look at his contract, you sort of do instead of the hot take tweet, look through it a little bit more. He's due for an $8.9 million cap hit. They could save $6.5 million of it. I'm actually doing a series for the site that'll probably come out next week or so on all the contract stuff and things we can look at. His 2021 salary is fully guaranteed. So
yeah,
if they cut him, it doesn't save any cash. So I don't think that's, I think he's going to be there, and the cap probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's kind of penny rich, pound poor, unless it's to facilitate a Rodgers trade. So yeah, I think that what's the typical career arc for a round 2 running back? It's midway through year 1. That's Nick Chubb, that's Mixon, right? You could that's Swift, Taylor, Dobbins, right? I mean, Akers for that matter, right? That's sort of week 6 to week 12 with about an average of 8 or so weeks into the season. That's typically where you see. So that would kind of be what I would think. I'd think that Gordon, it's a timeshare probably, at least to start, if not Gordon the starter, and then we'll see.
1 QB, long way to go for this trade. 1 QB is 102, 202 on Melvin Gordon, 4, 109, and the cherry, Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Wow. That's interesting. Well, that's something, because 109. I mean, the question is 109 is 109 potentially Sermon? I think that could be true.
It's possible, but probably unlikely.
Yeah,
he seems like he has that monorail kind of momentum going, and I think we're going to see. We were drafting him at 6 or 7, early in May, and it seems like we're in that direction more than we will, once we get there in the next 6 to 8 weeks, because it seems like he has a positive momentum.
Yeah. Is there any tight end premium in this?
I mean, I'm just gonna cut to it.
Yeah. No. Give me Edwards-Helaire.
Pitts, I mean, somewhere in there. So yeah. So you take Edwards-Helaire. I mean, I think to be fair, I mean, Edwards-Helaire is worth almost that whole thing himself. I mean, yeah, you can get a round 1 running back, so that's comforting there. But that's why I was, Gordon, how much is he providing for you? Is it part of a season? Is he morph into, they're both kind of in that running back 2 flex conversation for a span of time. All right, we've got Mike Evans and one quarterback for Michael Pittman and a 22 first.
This is what you value. I think this is largely what you value in terms of as a dynasty owner. If you want this
test, good dating profile question.
Yeah, if you want to consistently be rebuilding, if you want to consistently be struggling and doing that stuff, take the future pick. Do that, right? Just keep rolling that productive asset over. And I was doing some research this week for some future writing, and just looking at that, what this pick probably is in this trade is probably a receiver. And when you sort of just the person that makes this trade is thinking, I'm going to build long term with a receiver, it's just hemorrhaging value. And Mike Evans, give me Mike Evans. I mean, Mike Evans is going to go to the Hall of Fame, and we're going to spend the last 6 years of his career
discounting him heavily.
Dynasty. Right.
Yeah. Larry Fitzgerald, we're just going to keep dogging him late 20s into his 30s. Yeah, I was going to say Mike Evans this year probably posts a season that is 5-10 spots better than Michael Pittman ever does. So,
yeah, I mean, if Mike Evans posts a top 20 season this year, right, he's such a heavy favorite over Michael Pittman for the rest of his career.
Now you have an incoming rookie in 2022, because obviously what I found interesting in the forum was most people are on the Pittman side. They look at a 28-year-old wide receiver in Evans and they go, oh, I got Pittman, but I also get that first. I can just bank the first. Well, I mean, if that's a later first, I mean, obviously if you hit the jackpot and it's an early first, this thing could wrap around, right? I mean, you can get a stud running back and this could look a lot different, but that's not how you really project this, because I mean, if that's the Evans's first, I mean, and they're making a contending move, I mean, you got to read the room a little bit there.
Right.
All right. What do you think about a rebuilder in this scenario? Again, one quarterback, Alvin Kamara, and they were talking about how they shopped, and it was like this is the best they could get. I will say it's June. Reminder, it's June. One more time. It's not July. It's June. Alvin Kamara for a 22 first, a 23 first, Laviska Shenault, and Devin Singletary.
I wish there was a player in there that I liked. Is it?
Well, they got 2 running backs and 2 firsts. So
yeah. Is there like? I wish it was.
I'm just joking.
Yeah. I wish it was someone better than Singletary. Is it Superflex?
No.
Man, it's tough. It's tough. It's what the random first, unless it's an outrageous class, it's just really tough to think that's going to be a bankable big time difference, right? Because what's the odds? It's 105 is the easiest way to think of it.
It's probably not a round 1 running back.
Right.
Round 1 wide receiver is no guarantee.
Right. Yeah, and so ultimately you're sort of, you're doing that a couple years in a row, taking upside shots. I like to do that. The problem is I don't like to do it with a round 1 startup pick or round 2 startup pick, wherever Kamara's going and start 1.
See, I would much rather, why don't you get a cornerstone player? Like you can shift from Kamara. I mean, let's say you're worried about running back and you're like, I need to open up my window. You can still go for a wide receiver in their mid-20s. And so why don't you get that in the first? Like, why don't you get a cornerstone player and a first or a first and a second? Like, do the best you can within that. And I think they're looking at Chenault as like bigger than we project him. Right. And they're thinking of the 2 first. And yeah, you project out to 24, 25. Those picks are probably working for you in some capacity in terms of the players you're selecting if they do well. And yeah, you can use these as assets. I mean, look at this. I mean, you could trade the 22 first for Mike Evans. You could trade the 23 first for. The point is, though, that you're going to be in an environment where Kamara could win leagues over the next couple of years. Like, all he's done is that. So you're putting a lot of risk by not getting a top 15, 20 dynasty asset coming back. And none of these are that. So that's the big danger of rebuilding. And that's the other thing. Kamara's biggest value is going to be closer to the season, right? So
yeah.
I mean it's strange to say that. He's not overly old or anything, but he's a producer. He's not shiny. And you get close to the season, these are the players that become more valuable and more liquid when he's hosting 25, 30-point games.
Yeah,
it's not
for sure.
So that's, I think there's a lot of risk there. All right. One more. We've got, all right, Justin Jefferson on the move. So we've got profiling here. It's half PPR, 1 quarterback, 101 and a 22 first that looks top half of the round by what they said for Justin Jefferson. So assuming in half PPR, that's Najee Harris at 101 this year. And then you get a looking like non-playoff first next year as well.
Man, this is talk about profiling, right? I haven't done rankings. You and I have talked in other spaces about my feelings about them and the anxiety level that goes along with the rankings exercise. But if I did, I would say that I think Justin Jefferson has as good an argument for being wide receiver 1 as anyone does. And I think you kind of have to have him right there. And again, so then you're sort of looking at, Najee Harris, a first round running back who, again, has a really good hit rate, but he is a little bit older. This is not a wartless asset. And then you get a future first on top of it, right? So we just had the future first conversation a little bit there. I mean, you get a wide receiver 1 and they're like,
you get the whole
this
thing
early. I mean, I think you got to take that side. And I think I would take that side for a couple of reasons. That profile's really, really darn good. And what I really like about Justin Jefferson, by the way, is this isn't the Amari Cooper treatment, which was, hey, he posts a couple wide receiver 2 seasons and all of a sudden he's wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, right? We just saw an elite season from Justin Jefferson.
Like Odell Beckham. He just walked in and it's like, oh, okay, this is a thing now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I put old BC Johnson aside and now I'm the dude, right? That's what I really like about Justin Jefferson. This isn't a CeeDee Lamb thing where it's like, oh, look, he was a wide receiver 2, and all of a sudden we're going to make him wide receiver 5 in Dynasty.
Let's squint and make believe, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we actually saw him be like a wide receiver 1. And so, yeah, and I like the quarterback too. So all of those things said, like, I think it's a really good spot for him. And I think Harris is going to be good, but Jefferson's, the profile's outstanding. and it allows you to create a lot of different flexibilities in terms of your roster build going forward, right? You don't have to sort of constantly be trying to fix that wide receiver position. You have a damn good shot that position's fixed for quite a while.
I thought it was going to be pretty easy to argue either side on this one. To be fair, like I don't have a lot of these where I'm like, oh, I can kind of see both. Half PPR, it really is running back land. If this was non PPR, you may even change the answer. But I think with Najee Harris, the one thing I was going to ask you, because he's coming in at 23 years old, if he posts like a top 10 season, is he going to be one that is the age going to be a detriment? Is that going to be something the Dynasty community talks about because he's not coming off a 21 or 22-year-old season? He's going to be on the older side. Next year is 24, right in his prime. He better produce right away. His age window is pretty much rookie deal. He'll get to 27 or so, a la Derrick Henry. I just kind of wonder if he posts like a top 10 season, though, is this a trade that looks good, for that side coming off of it, where you're going to have a round one running back locked in, running back greater than wide receiver in general. Now you got the first come and do as well. So I do think Harris is capable of leveling this deal. Obviously, I think everything you said is apt, which is the risk is you just gave away a 22-year-old that came in, and even with Adam Thielen, even on a team that didn't throw it a ton, still lit it up.
Right.
So it's not like he walked in, Thielen was hurt, they pretty much had nothing going on, and Jefferson played really well. And now we have a question mark of other players in the mix. Like, no, I mean, he did it in spite of anything. He did it elevating whatever, like give me the ball. So I just, that's comforting.
What's the if you were to sort of look at this one, I sort of think of a risk minimization type of approach on this. What's the outside of injury? So let's just put injury aside for a second. That can't be the answer. How does this deal turn into a catastrophe? Like what's the like
you mean if you take Jefferson?
Yeah, right. I mean, if you take Jefferson,
Cousins is gone. They resculpt at quarterback, and the quarterback's not very good, which decreases your ceiling probabilities and stuff quite a bit.
Right.
I guess that would be it.
And I think if you sort of look at Harris, it's that he's Josh Jacobs. Right. That's kind of where he sort of finds himself, or a poor man's Josh Jacobs, even at that. And you sort of find yourself in a couple of years where, he hasn't
2-3 years. He's running back 10 to 20 a couple times. And you're like,
Yeah. Yeah. And where, and so that's the thing. I guess my argument, I think, to be the other side of it is I think you've got a chance to have a couple of elite assets with the Harris and the pick side. But I just think that the Jefferson sides, it solves a lot of issues.
It's tougher to miss, right? Running back. I mean, if Najee Harris gets hurt, what if the Steelers' offense and the running game and all that kind of stuff really stinks? What if he doesn't get the targets because they're loaded at wide receiver? Ben Roethlisberger leaves, it hemorrhages the whole off. Like there is more variable there than Kirk Cousins, eroding like Ben Roethlisberger looks like he is, and things like that. So yeah, and like you said, the bankable, he's pretty much on Odell Beckham sort of path, right? Yeah. I mean, doing what he did, round one pedigree out of the gate, that floor is pretty high, from now until, I'm not gonna say infinity, but for a while.
Right. I think the other thing too is the Jefferson argument is it's a lot easier to replicate Najee Harris than it is to replicate Justin Jefferson.
Great
point. That would be my argument.
You're rolling the waiver wire, you're rolling some backup running backs, but try to get 54 Michael Pittmans and get an outcome that's Justin Jefferson ever. You could be doing that till you retire from Dynasty, and you still may not have done it once.
Right.
So yeah, and that's the thing, right? You get a young core guy, almost like you get Patrick Mahomes and Superflex, and you're just like, I'm just not thinking about this for a while, and that's good with me. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. Starting off, I offered an insta accept, so I wonder if I didn't ask for enough. They offered a trade. It was insta accepted, which isn't really a word. So I was wondering if I didn't ask for enough.
It's instacepted is I think how the kids are saying it now.
You're so young and wise, Jordan. You're hip. You're hip. Said no one ever.
I'm just making that up. Yeah, no one's ever called me hip. That's it. I think it's a fair thing. I don't know. If you go through the analysis of the trade and say, hey, listen, if the other side accepts this, I'm happy with it. don't second guess yourself, right? You can sort of beat yourself up.
They
Could you have
sound
gotten more? Maybe.
so new to Dynasty, because if you send out a bunch of offers, if you do the mass mailings as I do, I mean, getting an acceptance from your first wave of offers, 10 to 15 of them, I mean, you'll take any of those. And that's the whole point.
Positive EV, right?
Yeah, I mean, you send out offers that you hope one of these gets accepted.
Right.
You send them out on the base. Now, could you have squeezed a future third or second or whatever?
Right.
Like, this whole trying to work the edges to that degree. I mean, come on, you're questioning that the one you sent wasn't quite aggressive enough. Let's relax a little bit on working the edges to that 5-10% degree, because again, you got a deal, you proposed it. A lot of times it's counter, deal dies, counter, expletive in the comment section. I can't believe you. How dare you insult my children like this? And so, I mean, again, this is smooth. You sent out one offer and it was accepted. Now you have regrets, as they call it. So, all right. It's hard to go against a really proven young guy, even when it's too early first. Oh my God, we just had that trade. I think that was actually a comment to the Justin Jefferson deal, but you pretty much said exactly that.
Yeah. No, I think it's what are you trying to accomplish, right? And
is there another? So there's no other wide receiver you would put in that deal and do it, right?
I don't think so. Yeah. And I think I really think that AJ Brown's a pretty good player. I think that we could sort of be in a scenario where it's Amari Cooper in a couple of years, just from a volume perspective, right? Where everyone sort of, it's the Juju thing, it's the DJ Moore thing. Everyone sort of goes too early at the position. We don't have any of those. Like, Justin Jefferson's the one we don't have questions about, right? We know that he can be the volume guy. Right? We know, we've seen him do that. We've seen him in a run first offense take an enormous value. Like, we've got it. We know that he can do that. Some of these other guys we haven't, and I just think that I guess that's my argument for him as wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, right? And I guess I made it. So
this could be a whole show. Good assets are usable in ways other than as a weekly starter.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of it too, like I said, I'm working through a theory now that I've sort of hinted at, I think, in other spots, which is, the core asset theory, right? It's kind of like basketball. And I think basketball, you mentioned this earlier, and, you and I talk offline quite a bit about the NBA playoffs. We've sort of it falls perfectly in time for us because it's post NFL draft. It's sort of in a not a super busy.
We need our live sports.
yeah. I'm sitting over here tweaking, and but no, the trades are really fascinating because you sort of think about them and they're going, they're moving core assets, and it really matches up a lot of what Dynasty is like, I think. And so I think it's really, you look at what they do, and it's, adding 3 or 4 assets together to get a core guy or to get an elite guy. And then once you get them, right, they have other things that are valuable, their rights in terms of what their contract is, in terms of all that stuff. It just puts you in a different strata. I think a lot of that holds true in Dynasty, right? And so I do think when you can sort of move up the pecking order in terms of it, it's worth, packaging a couple guys together, because then it gives you access to other deals.
And at all times, you need to keep your eyes open for discounted, distressed core assets for either fringe or not core asset prices, or far below, where they were. If that's injury, if that's poor play, if that just stink around them, or frankly, let's call it old age, the AARP group, and this feels like the most ripe offseason ever I've seen from that regard. Last one, just hate to walk away from a championship team just to sell on a player early.
Yeah, that's one that's always going to be a debate, right? And I would say I think we probably, in this conversation that we've had tonight, I think we probably can take from that we overstate the value of a single player. So that's one aspect, I think, of the conversation that's important from a WARP perspective. I had someone tell me today that, hey, they'd never want someone to retire off their roster. I used to be that guy. I used to be the guy that never wanted to have anyone over 26 because I thought it was some scarlet letter in Dynasty to have someone.
The championship doesn't count, Jordan, if you have somebody too old on your team.
Right. That was me. I've been much more. I think it's a nice value opportunity. Matt Ryan, for example, right? I don't think worrying about him retiring off my roster is something that's particularly concerning, because it's not. once you lose Andrew Luck off your roster, like everything becomes a little bit less significant in terms of those things. So yeah, I mean, I don't, it's really tough to get into a contending window if you're really honest with yourself. And when I talk about a contending window, is it your average shot of winnings 8.3% or so, and are you 2 or 3 times that? Right. Because that's if it is, like, it's really damn tough to get there. And it's kind of, hey, you kind of got to let the chips fall where they may and sort of see what you can sort of pack in that time. It's like the 5% theory and basketball, right? If you've got a 5% shot to win the championship, you kind of have to go for it. And that's kind of what I would think with, if you're in a window, like, I don't really want to sell out of it typically.
Yeah, and if you're in your window, there's a lot of ways to keep scrubbing away, improving your team. It really doesn't take, it's not like 3/4 of your team has to now be young guys. Like, you can just have, hey, I got a couple wide receivers that are on their rookie deals that are developing, but I don't have to truly lean on, or, I got a couple young running backs, or don't even have a young quarterback. You don't have to have a young tight end. So you don't have to have more than 4, 5, 6 younger players that are like, okay, they're developing. If a player does retire or really decrease their utility for me in the next season or two, which is a little early than maybe their trajectory looks, I'm going to be okay. And I think keeping that contending window going is a lot easier than burn it to the ground. Hopefully I really hit. I got a bunch of picks, but now those picks have to turn into production at some point. I see way too many that do this serial rebuilding where they never actually get all the way there. Like, what's the end game here? I mean, if you're just doing a thought experiment, or just, fooling around in your league, hey, I wanted to try something where I just trade everybody away all the time. It's like, I do want to have a young team, and it's just, I don't know, it's fun for me. That's different. That's different than probably how you should be treating a big part of your dynasty portfolio, which is, like you said, it's hard to actually be in a window. Hey, I'm one of the top 2 or 3 teams in my league. All right, so be careful. You have downside here. You have a little bit of upside, but you have
Don't
a
screw
lot of
it up.
downside. Exactly. You're in the game, right? I mean, you got to punch your shot this year without a deluge of injuries or poor play or something screwy going on. I have a good chance to be there. A better chance than 3 or 4 teams in my league for sure. Don't screw that up. I mean, you're probably looking at, like, of the other teams that aren't dead rebuilding, or teams that shoot themselves in the foot by now rebuilding on the fly or whatever, all of a sudden you've got a pretty good shot to make the playoffs, and now you take your chance. And who knows how far you get. But that's the bounce of the oblong ball of head to head. That's the chance that you have to take. And so, yeah, throwing that away. And, we kind of talked about, Alvin Kamara, and you sold him for 3 or 4 pieces, quarters for the dollar. And then all of a sudden, you trade away Justin Jefferson, and then you trade another guy when you're like, aren't I the smartest guy in the room? Be careful, because you could end up wearing the dunce hat. You're in the corner. You're in the corner with the dunce hat. You're actually not that smart. You had a great team.
Yeah, a lot of times the person that thinks is the smartest person in the room isn't. they're actually wearing the dunce hat. They just don't realize it. So
don't they say that if you walk into the room and you think you're the smartest guy, you're probably not?
Yeah, let's say, how do you spot the sucker at a poker table, right? Yeah. If you've spent a half hour there and you don't know who it is,
you don't know who the sucker is, it's you. Yeah, if you don't know who the sucker is, it's you.
Yeah,
there you go. All right, so we talked a lot in this show. We talked about inconsistency at the top of the show. We talked about what points mean, and points matter, and frankly, in head-to-head, how much they don't matter in terms of margin of victory. And you always remember the tight ones that you lost. It's basically how it goes. But give yourself credit for the tight ones you win as well. So it doesn't come down to one player most of the time. We talked about a lot of trading profiles, of course, Justin Jefferson, Justin Herbert a few minutes ago, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Alvin Kamara, etc. And closing out, talking about how to contend as well as the trading market and not be so hard on yourself, sending out those deals. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.